Hi guys. Today we're going to be solving multi-step inequalities. Now, this is literally exactly the same as solving multi-step equations. So again, this chapter is practically a repeat of chapter 2. So if you feel pretty confident about chapter 2, this chapter should be a breeze. The only thing you have to be careful of and be on the lookout for are those two scenarios where you have to flip your inequality. Scenario number 1, in the very, very, very last step, if you are multiplying or dividing by a negative, then you have to flip your inequality. It's the very, very last step of work, though. Nothing before that. And scenario number 2, if you think you're done with the problem and the letter is on the right-hand side, then you got to flip-flop everything. So the only times you should be changing your inequality are at the very, very, very end of a problem. So let's take a look at some examples. Notice that the directions say solve and graph. We will be practicing our graphing again today. Make sure when you're doing your homework that you're also reading your directions. In this problem, my first step is to distribute the 3 to the x plus 1. My personal choice on my next step is going to be to combine like terms. So I will be combining together the 3x and the negative 4x. At this point in time, I don't have a choice on my next step. My next step must be to subtract that 3 from both sides. All right, now I am at the end of the problem. I'm on my last step of work, and then I'm going to have an answer. So this is where I really have to start paying attention to whether or not I need to flip my inequality. For my very, very last step on this problem, I will be dividing both sides by -1. Since I'm dividing by a negative number, on my final step, I will be flipping my inequality around. And remember, as soon as you decide to divide by a negative, you might want to just go down to that next line and go ahead and flip your inequality right now. Even though my answer is a positive number, the fact that I divided by a negative means I have to flip my inequality. The last thing I should check is to make sure that my letter is on the correct side. And it is. I started with the letter x, and so I am now done with the inequality portion of this problem. My final answer is x is less than or equal to 8. Now I do also have to graph, so I will be doing that next. When you're graphing, remember you only have to write down the number 0 in the middle as a reference point. And then if it's positive, you go to the right. And if it's negative, you go to the left. In this problem, I got a positive 8, so I'm going to put that to the right of the 0. I don't care how far away it is, how close it is. It really does not matter. You do not have to write all the numbers between 0 and 8. Just put 0, and then if it's positive, go to the right, and if it's negative, go to the left. In this problem, it can equal 8 because it has or equal to, so I'm going to put a closed circle on the 8. And then if we're looking at the inequality right here, it's a less than, and it's an arrow pointing in this direction. So that's the way I'm going to shade. Notice that my shading starts at the 8 and goes all the way to the end of the number line. This is the end of our first example. Let's try another one. This again is a refresher on just our chapter 2 concepts with just a teeny tiny bit of extra stuff, right? We have, maybe we have to flip our inequality, and at the end we do need to graph. But most of this is a repeat of chapter 2. So from chapter 2, I learned that I should move my variables together. Now you do have a choice in this problem. You can either move the 3n to the other side, or you can move the 6n to the other side. My personal choice, I always like to move the smaller number, so I'm going to choose to move the 3n. Now, it doesn't matter which one you move. You'll get the same answer either way. So if you want to move the 6n, that's fine, and try it on your own, and then just check and make sure that you get the same answer as I do. Next, I would add 1 to both sides. All right, I'm on my last step. So this is where I really have to start paying attention and make sure that I recognize when I need to flip my inequality. So for my last step, I will be dividing by a positive 3. Since the number that I'm dividing by is positive, I do not need to flip my inequality. So I'm going to leave it a less than symbol. Notice that I kept everything where it was. On the left side, 9 divided by 3 is 3, and I wrote that on the left side. On the right side, the 3 is canceled, and I left my n on the right side. Now, the last thing I need to check for is if the letter is on the correct side. And in this problem, it is not on the correct side. I do need to flip-flop everything. Now, this one, you also have to flip-flop the inequality. So I will be now switching my inequality, but I'm switching my inequality now because I decided to switch what side the letter was on. And so my final inequality answer is n is greater than 3. If you had chosen to move the 6 instead, you're going to get a negative 3n plus 8 is less than negative 1. You would minus the 8. And you would also end up flipping your inequality, but you would flip your inequality for a different reason. So you would need to divide by a negative number, and that is going to flip your inequality. And so again, it doesn't matter which one you move where, you're still going to get the same answer. And we both would end up flipping our inequalities. All right, let's graph. So again, we need the number 0, and 3 is positive, so I'm going to put that to the right of the 0. In this problem, 3 is not a solution. It's not an answer because it's just a greater than symbol. It's not greater than or equal to 3. So I'm going to put an open circle on the 3, meaning that 3 is not a solution. And then if we take a look at the inequality is pointing to the right, kind of like this arrow is pointing to the right. And so that's the way I'm going to shade. Notice again, I started on the circle 3 and I shaded all the way to the end of the number line. All right, let's do one more just to be safe, and then you should be able to complete your homework tonight. So here's my last problem. I am going to distribute a negative 2 first to the 4m and the 7. Notice that the plus 7 turned into a minus 14 because I'm distributing a negative 2. Sometimes I find it helpful to circle the number I'm distributing so that I remember that it's a negative. My personal choice on what I want to do next, and this does not have to be your next step, but this is what I think makes the most logical sense to me. I'm going to combine together the 5 and the negative 14 because those are like terms and they're both on the right-hand side. So 5 minus 14 is negative 9. At this point in time, my next step must be to add the 9 to each side. And I'm at my final step of the problem. So this again is where we really need to start paying attention to if we need to flip our inequality. And so for my final step of work, I'm going to divide both sides by negative 8. And that because I'm dividing by a negative, on my next line, I'm going to flip my inequality. I'm going to keep everything on the side where it currently is. So 24 divided by negative 8 is negative 3, and I'm going to write that first. I'm going to flip my inequality because I divided by a negative, and then I'm going to keep my m second. So the only thing that I did right now was I divided. Everything needs to stay on the same side, but your inequality will flip because of the negative number. As a final check, we need to see if the letter is on the correct side, and it is not. So this is a double flip problem. We are flipping once because we divided by a negative, and then we're going to flip a second time right now because the letter is on the wrong side, and I need to move it to the other side of the inequality. So I'm going to flip it back. On a double flip problem, your inequality is going to look like it didn't flip at all because it's going to flip back to the original way. But in reality, you should have flipped it twice, once for dividing by a negative and once for moving the letter to the other side. So be very aware and very careful of those double flip problems. At this point in time, I'm happy with my final answer. M is less than or equal to negative 3, and I'm ready to graph it. In this problem, negative 3 is going to go to the left of the 0 instead of the right because it's a negative number. So I have my 0 in the middle, and then I have negative 3 is to the left of it. In this problem, it is allowed to equal negative 3, so I'll be putting a closed circle on the negative 3. And my inequalities arrow is pointing to the left, so I'm going to shade to the left, starting at the circle and go all the way to the end. This concludes today's notes.